This is our 2025 pros and cons of living in Destin. You might have seen our pros and cons living on 30A, but this one is going to be all about Destin and the differences, a lot of the differences between living in Destin versus 30A, Niceville, Freeport, Panama City Beach, Fort Walton. So this one's specifically on Destin, and we are so excited to get started. So let's jump right into the video.
Hello, this is Sabina, broker owner of Haus Realty, and this is my lovely daughter Christina, and we are working together as a mother-daughter team here in the Emerald Coast.
All right, so we're going to start with the pros today, and I think the first pro for us is there really is a lot to do in Destin versus some of the other areas. You've got Harbor Walk Village, you've got Crab Island, you've got Big Kahuna Water Park, you've got go-karting, lots and lots of things to do, attractions to do other than just the beach. And I feel like a lot of those areas, other than Panama City Beach, don't really offer that. Would you agree?
Yeah, I do agree, Christina. And, keep in mind that Destin is known for its fishing charter boats. And it was, the first little community established here in the Panhandle. And when we came here, actually, when we took you here when you were a little infant, 30A didn't really exist yet. Yes, there was Grayton Beach, but you were driving miles and miles of undeveloped land, and Destin and Miramar Beach were kind of the area where you first, where this whole panhandle kind of exploded.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that. And along with all the things to do, the shopping, right? We've got Silver Sand Outlet Malls, which is technically in Miramar, but you're right on the border. And then you have Destin Commons, which is probably the biggest shopping attraction other than Pier Park in the area. Mm-hmm. And you have your Marshalls, Home Goods, Whole Foods, all of these chains, a Target. None of that is on 30A at all. So being able to live by that and not have to deal with the traffic to get there is, I would say, a pretty big pro, because whenever I'm driving all the way there, I'm like, oh, I have to drive 40 minutes to Target today,
That's true. It's almost 40 minutes, right?
Yeah.
From 38 to Destin.
Well, no traffic. I went there once at like 6 a.m. and it took me less than 20 minutes. But in the middle of the day with the lights, probably 40 minutes.
Well, you're right. Talking about attraction, I don't know if you're going to get to this, but Crab Island is really what most people love to do, hang out on their boats.
Yes.
And it gets really crowded in the summertime, but that's one of the highlights in Destin.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. You park your boat, it's a couple feet of water, you can stand, it's crystal clear. There's Chick-fil-A boats driving around selling chicken sandwiches, popsicles, food, drink. It's awesome.
Did you know they had a water taxi too? You can take the water taxi from Holiday Isle over to...
No, I didn't know that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right, so our next pro, and this kind of goes along with the other pros as well, is there are more food options other than seafood. There's a lot of seafood on 30A, which I love the food on 30A. But if you're looking for something a little more different, maybe you want more Asian cuisine, maybe more Italian, maybe you love your chains. You love, going to a Longhorn or a Outback Steakhouse. Destin's going to have all of that, and 30A doesn't have all of that. So it goes along with that. There's also local places in Destin too, so you kind of have both there that you don't really have both on 30A, which is kind of changing, but not nearly as established as Destin.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I mean, sometimes they have more chain restaurants, whereby in Walton County, 30A, you have more local restaurants.
Yeah. This one is Destin is very kid-friendly. Not that the other areas aren't, but they do have a lot of stuff to do for kids that isn't the beach, like go-karting. They have Big Kahuna Water Park, which I know I mentioned earlier in the video. There's 2 bowling alleys there. There's a movie theater. There's a lot of little attractions, arcades, stuff like that. Just a lot for the kids to do.
Yeah, Destin Commons has a great area of its waterfalls where the kids can run around. And when you and Judson were little, we took you to Destin all the time. We actually stayed in Miramar Beach, went to Destin quite often. And we did the little tubing at the water park, and we also took you out on the little bumper go-karts. You remember that?
Yes. All right, my next pro, which is a very big pro in comparison to Walton County, is Bay County does not have private beaches. They're not dealing with all of this craziness. And there are a lot bigger public beach accesses in Destin than in 30A Walton County.
Well, you know, that's really true. Destin does not have the customary use in place, and the beaches are all public, except, of course, when you're staying in those big resorts. They do have their private beaches. And you also have the beautiful Henderson State Park.
Those were all of my specific pros to Destin. Do you have any other pros that I didn't mention that you feel you want to highlight at this time?
Well, there are some very popular communities like Kelly Plantation, Regatta Bay. People love living there. You know, if you, depending on where you're working, if you're living here full time, you know, you can go over to Niceville. You got the Mid-Bay Bridge. You're very close to Fort Walton, closer to Pensacola. So the location sometimes also plays an impact. So, you know, it really truly depends on what you're looking for in your home and also your lifestyle.
Now we're going to move on to the cons of living in Destin. And my first one has to be the traffic. I know I also mentioned the traffic in the 30A video. We talked about that. But Destin can get quite congested when it's raining outside with all the malls there in 98. And it is a little more, I would say, congested on a normal basis. You know, 30A gets congested when there's a lot of people in town and stuff like that, but Destin can get congested on a normal basis.
Well, you know, about 2 years ago, they widened the road, and it really, truly made a big difference.
Yeah.
But I tend to agree with you because there's more shopping strips, so that the traffic gets a little bit more congested because people are pulling into Destin Commons, or they're pulling into a restaurant, and that slows down the traffic. So that is true. The traffic is always an issue, but it's really in the summertime, and if you get up early in the morning, you go to Lowe's, for example, it's not that bad. It's certain times of the day when it gets crowded and congested.
Yeah, and then I would 100% agree with you. And then our next con is there are a lot of older buildings in Destin. You know, we have a lot more new construction or newer homes over here. So when you're buying a home in Destin, you might have to get a little bit more on the inspection. There might be more repairs on the homes. A lot of the condos are very old, so when you have to go and you're looking to buy a condo, you're going to have to really look at the milestone report and the condo writer to make sure that everything is good with that condo because they are a little bit older.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, there are a couple of newer buildings that they're actually putting up a new construction now in Miramar Beach, couple, but you're absolutely right, you know, because Destin was the first area here that was developed, so you also see the older homes, but that is true.
Yeah. And then, you know, my next one is, you know, you still have plenty of nature in Destin, don't get me wrong. There's still lots of trails to walk on. You still have our beach, obviously. But I do feel like Walton County has a lot more nature trails, walking trails. You know, you have that big path along 30A that you can walk along. We have our coastal dune lakes on 30A. You don't have those in Destin. So I do feel you get a little bit more of the biking, walking trails over here, just a little more spread out than in Destin.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. Destin seems a lot more compacted, you know, it's much more established, and you don't have the coastal dune lakes where we have 13 here in Walton County.
Yeah, I would agree. And then another con that I have is you can't bring your dog on the beach in Destin. So Okaloosa County doesn't allow dogs at all. If you live in Walton County, you can get a permit to take your dog on the beach if you own property here, you live here full time. But in Destin, if you live in Destin, no dogs on the beach. Also no bonfires on the beach, which you can always drive over to Walton County to have a beach bonfire, but they do not allow either one of those in Okaloosa County.
Yeah, except some of the resorts that have their own deeded beach access, they do offer bonfires, but you can't go and get a permit.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, we did one with Women's Council there, but you know, that is true in Walton County. Now remember, if you get the dog permit, you have to be a resident in Walton County. So if you live in Okaloosa County, you can't apply for a Walton County dog permit.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, another con, now that you say that I'm thinking of is, you know, I know we mentioned in the beginning a pro is you have a lot more restaurants and shopping and all of that. But what comes along with that as well is the everything being local charm kind of gets taken out of it. You know, here on 30A, everything is a local business, and that is really charming and cute, and a lot of people love that. And yes, you may have to drive to Destin to go to all the chains, but you know, a lot of people love that about 30A. So I would say with Destin, you're not getting that same really small local feel. It's more established.
Yep, you can definitely see it. But one of the things I think we didn't mention into the post earlier on is because it's really the fishing village. You have to remember that Destin is on the path where you can take your boats out onto the ocean, where in Walton County, we don't have that. There's a couple of access in Grayton Beach, but you really have to go towards Panama City to go out on a charter boat. So if you go deep fishing, for example, Destin is the area to go.
Driving to Destin.
There you go.
All right, so before I head to our overall area pros and cons, what are any other cons that you can think of that I didn't cover here?
In Destin?
Yes. Not to put you on the spot or anything.
Oh yeah, you like to do that, I know. Pricing is a little bit more reasonable in some areas in Destin for sure. Older homes, the condos, there's a lot more selection in condos than Walton County, where there is a height restriction. We really only have one condo. So if you're looking for an investment property, in the 400s, you have a lot more option in Destin than, for example, in Walton County.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that's definitely something to consider.
One of the things in Destin and also Miramar Beach is you find more beach activities like wave runners rentals and parachuting, parasailing. You have the private boat that leaves. So there's more activities. If you're coming for a week vacation and you like the laid back sandy beaches like, on 30A, that's one thing. But if you're bringing your teenagers or your kids and they like to have more activities, then Destin is definitely more.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Okay. So as far as overall area pros, we did go in a little bit more detail in this in the 30A pros and cons video, but beautiful beaches, amazing community here, and you have that small town laid back feel, and I would say that's in general all over the Panhandle. And then obviously your cons are we're at the beach, there are hurricanes, the insurance is a little bit higher, we don't have major airports or sporting events around us or a huge city until maybe Atlanta, New Orleans, Orlando. So those are kind of some overall pros and cons, but we hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure you subscribe. We post all kinds of video about the Emerald Coast, and we're always happy to answer any questions. And we will see you in the next one.
Until the next time, auf Wiedersehen, tschüss and goodbye.
Bye.